Great. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. So thank you all for being here and coming to our first talk of the Friday Forum series this spring. We're super excited to have everyone here and have Sable with us today to kick everything off. So quickly before we start, I just wanted to take this time to make a quick important message. For anyone who has been part of the Y or been a member before, this may not be new news to you, but we're very sad to say that Claire Zoke, a longtime supporter and friend to the University Y, has recently passed. Claire was a great friend to many of us, and we just want to share our condolences to her friends, to her family and loved ones. We're incredibly thankful for the passion and energy she has given to the Y and to its mission, and as a member herself of the Friday Forum Committee, putting everything together for this series. So just really hope that we are able to honor her and her commitment to social justice and to the University Y's mission through this series and through the future work that we do here. So just want to quickly make note of that, and thank you all for letting me do that today. So as we get started, I'm just going to quickly set the scene for anyone who hasn't been able to attend any kind of Friday Forum in the past. If you have been a member before, this may not be new news to you, but Friday Forum is a weekly lecture series that is held every semester here at the university. And our goal is to raise awareness about different national and international trends and events. And really provide a space to address topics that are of relevance and urgency in our society and to the people here. So some of our past series have looked at things like the current state of our democracy, using art as activism, environmental justice, and much, much more. So for this semester and this spring, we're super excited to be able to really dive into what kind of the digital world is looking like for us right now. In the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, many of us are using technology way more than we ever have before. And the world of technology obviously opens many, many doors for global connection, but there's also consequences that come with that. And looking into both the way digital media and technology shapes, but also misshapes our world is an incredibly relevant issue. And trying to understand the intersections between technology and things like race, class, privacy, faith, and things like that are going to be of utmost importance to move forward as we continue using technology. So for today, we have Sable Manson, who's going to be talking a little bit about technology and how digital technology can be seen as has once been seen as a potential hindrance to religious development and spiritual enlightenment, but is now being leveraged in new and meaningful ways, especially throughout the pandemic, but also just in general as things are moving along. So we're super excited to have that, have her and her expertise here with us today. As you're listening to the talk, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Sable towards the end of the series today, please make sure to type your questions with the Q&A function, and we'll go ahead and read out those questions towards the end. Additionally, in the chat right now, I'm going to send a list of our sponsors for this series. We really are thankful for all of the people and supporters we have who have made this series possible. So thank you so much. So as I start getting ready to pass it on to Sable, I'm just going to quickly introduce her. Sable holds a PhD from the University of Southern California, and her work focuses on interfaith engagement and digital faith. Sable's the outgoing vice chair of NASPA's Spiritual and Religion in Higher Education Knowledge Community, as well as the current interfaith minister in residence for the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. At USC, Sable is the Assistant Director for Student Leadership and Development for the Joint Educational Project, as well as the Program Director for Interfaith Scholars for the Office of Religious Life. And in 2020, she published an edited book, Remixed and Reimagined, Innovations in Religion, Spirituality, and Interfaith in Higher Education, with Dr. J.T. Snipes from Myers Education Press. So Sable, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I will go ahead and pass it on to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you all about a few topics that I'm very, very passionate about, and that also are continuing to become more and more salient and more relevant to our daily lives. So I will share my presentation and we shall begin. So first, I would like to thank being invited to this particular series, Ross Watlin. He was a great colleague of mine that really connected me with this amazing program and this amazing series. So I'm very excited to acknowledge both our connection. We have a few NASPA connections, but also appreciate him really connecting us and really seeing the alignment between the series theme and the work that I do. So as a bit of an overview, these are the main topics that I plan on covering. We will talk about first, what is digital faith? I'll share a little bit about my background in the topic and how I came to this work. Next, we'll talk a little bit about faith in times of crisis and the current crisis of faith. In a lot of ways, the current circumstances in the pandemic has put so much additional stress. Faith has also been seen to aid in times of stress, but also how do you deal with the tension when some of the religious and spiritual practices are actually limited because of the current crisis that we find ourselves in. To answer that question, we move to the next sections, which talk about keeping the faith remotely. So these are some insights and some examples of people who have really utilized digital technology to engage faith remotely, really looking at the emphasis on technology as a supplement. But also, we're going to talk a little bit about a faith at a distance or faith at home, because for many, our faiths are connected to community. And so how can we still maintain that connection at a distance, sometimes at our homes, in the safest way possible for our communities? And finally, I will end with a few thoughts about how moving forward, this experience and some of the ways in which individuals have been compelled or forced to innovate actually really helps us remix and reimagine faith in general, and definitely faith moving forward in light of digital technology. So a little bit about my background and how I came to this. Although no one could have predicted the emphasis that we would now be placed upon our technology, I have had an interest in this kind of intersection between faith and experiences of faith in digital worlds or digital platforms since about 2014. I began with a lovely collaboration with a very good colleague of mine, Dr. Vanessa Monterosa, who at the time was working with LAUSD and their digital citizenship. My background is in religion and spirituality in higher ed. So we really saw that there was some synergy in maybe kind of offering some insights. And the conference that we ended up displaying and discussing some of that work was Haystacks. It happened to be that year, it was an international conference in Peru, which was very attractive to one of the reasons why we wanted to apply. But it really was amazing to be in an international conversation, again, talking about faith, talking about digital technology, and seeing that it was a topic that was relevant in an international conversation as well as in a domestic conversation. After that, I began working on, I wrote a bid for an organization called Patheos, which is an online forum for religious and spiritual content. A number of different bloggers and authors have been on Patheos, and I would say that the piece that I feel really captures what digital faith is, or my approach to digital faith, was an article that I did called "Spirituality and Materiality in a Digital World." Super fancy title, but basically it talked about this idea that for so long in our religious history, it was about the artifacts. It was about the location of it. Even in indigenous cultures, even kind of original faith systems and belief systems, it was around certain objects or places. It was a particular rock. It was a particular clearing. Many times there were artifacts that were included in it. Of course, as things formalized, they became Bibles and Qurans and other things. But even going back to all kinds of experiences, there was really this connection between the material world and needing something to kind of be a conduit to the spiritual world. And what this piece kind of highlighted was that as digital technology has changed and evolved, our idea of what is material has also really changed and shifted. I use the example of our phones and our photos and our music. There was once a time in which, I don't know, I'm dating myself by the reference, but I have a number of CDs left. I mean, of course, people in different have records and cassettes and a number of things, but there was once a time in which music was very much on a CD, on a cassette, on something that you had to physically take here and there. But the same thing with our pictures. We would print them out and they were these physical things that we would put up. But now, because of technology, things have evolved to now they're all ones and zeros. And now you have whole libraries of photos and music on your phone. And whether it's the cloud or whether it is digital technology, the things that we actually prize the most, our connections, are now in this kind of immaterial state, if you kind of think about it philosophically. And so this was part of the curiosity and part of the reason why I was so intrigued by just the development of this, because in many ways, this exploration of religion and spirituality would not have been possible through digital technology without the digital technology. We had to find a moment in which both there was an understanding in how it could be used, but also in regards to this pandemic, there's now been this greater emphasis that now that we are in these worlds, we must make the best of it. So if you want to hear a little bit more, I also wrote a bit about digital faith, also in Pathos, that kind of outlines some of the other points. But I just wanted to kind of offer that as kind of a philosophical underpinning for why digital technology is so interesting. And for those who actually engage in these digital spaces and use digital tools and devices and platforms to support their faith, they don't see tension. They don't see it as something that must be antithetical to each other. They really see it as this synergy between utilizing tools and things that we have developed and actually enhancing their faith. So definitely a way to begin this conversation. Again, because of my connections to NASPA, a lot of my research and a lot of some of my writings on this have been within the higher ed context. So really looking at how higher education students are utilizing digital technology for religious and spiritual development. However, especially for a forum like this, it's definitely content that I feel is relevant to a number of audiences, and definitely something that I think is applicable even that much more so nowadays. But some of the other writings and some of the other pairings that I've done around this topic have been digital tools and devices. I did a piece on social media and digital faith with my colleague, Janet Cordovez, who is now over at IFYC. And most recently, I also did a collaboration looking at African-American students and their experiences of digital faith, whether it be Facebook groups or actually looking at Black atheists and how they utilized YouTube and a few other online platforms. I did that work with Dr. J.T. Snipes, who I also collaborated and did the book with, but also Dr. Keon McGuire, who is over at ASU. So definitely a strong foundation in this. So the points that I'm going to pull out for this talk really come from working and thinking about these topics in many different ways. And then, of course, being receptive and responsive to this new context in which something that was once seen as a supplement or something that was seen as a novelty is now becoming somewhat essential for many people moving forward in order to still engage their faith. So faith in times of crisis and crisis of faith. I would not be the first to say that these times, and particularly the turmoil of 2020, really caused a lot of people, regardless of how they identify, to really wonder what was going on, who was in charge as it were, and really, trying to find meaning, trying to make sense. It was impacting every aspect continues to impact every aspect of public and private life. There is also this pervasive feelings of anxiety, fear, grief, and stress. These are not manifestations in our heads. These are genuine, heartfelt reactions to what has been going on around us. So again, some people lean upon or depend upon their faith, or their faith can really kind of buoy them in times of trouble. But also, as you can imagine, there is this questioning of how can all of this also be happening. So while that has been seen on one end, there's also been this outpouring of creativity, care, and connection. Many people have become so innovative in trying to find ways of maintaining connections with family members, with friends, finding ways of adapting and thinking about their faith practices, both how they could do it safely, and even just reflecting upon what is most important to them. in regards to their faith. So it has also been a time in which many of us are home. So we are really compelled to think about these topics in deep, new, and profound ways. I put the asterisk there by faith because when I use faith, I really, it is all encompassing in the ways in which I use it. Religion, both traditional religions and indigenous religions, and spirituality, both how it has evolved and the ways in which spiritual practices enhance and supplement religious practices, but also the wide variety of wellness and wellness practices, whether it be yoga, meditation, that can have spiritual connections or not have spiritual connections, but help our well-being. So it's an all-inclusive term, at least in how I use it, but I at least wanted to acknowledge that there are differences between how people use these terms and how it expresses itself within their faith, within their religious practice, within their spiritual experiences, and their wellness practices, daily rituals, etc. So in reaction to what has happened, many of us have been remote, whether that's working remotely or in some capacity, there is remote access now to our daily experiences. And so while there have been tools and apps and devices that have been utilized by communities prior to 2020, there's really been an uptick. If you go on your general phone app store, whether it's Android or Apple, and you could just search a few basic terms, whether it's spirituality, whether it's religion, wellness. You could certainly do it by religious tags. You'll see that there is a whole swath of both health and fitness kind of perspectives on that kind of support, but also very explicit traditional, whether it be daily Christian devotionals, whether it be an online digital version of the Quran. There are some meditation apps that have certain alarms. I've seen a few apps for Muslim students and Muslim individuals that have built into the app a compass to make sure that you are facing the correct direction, or you could set certain times. So again, these app developers and just people taking and engaging these tools and devices has really encouraged people to think about what is needed for my religious or spiritual practices. How can I create a tool that, much like our original kind of written text, or a chalice, or a staff, in the same way so those artifacts trigger and help set the scene, and help us get into a spiritual mindset, or help us exercise and complete the rituals. People are now thinking about, okay, how can there be a digital component to that, if there must be? And related to that, what is something that, even if you get a mini Bible, they could still be cumbersome. And again, much like having a number of books on your phone, now you can have whole sacred text, the whole Bhagavad Gita on your phone and in instant access. So it has been both a development of tools and devices, but also a thinking through and a betterment of these devices so that they feel authentic. They don't intrude upon the experience, they enhance it in so much as possible. Also, we've seen a rise in multimedia platforms. We ourselves are using a platform, as it were, Zoom and Facebook, Instagram Live. These are all, well, often used in social capacities, are also being used to disseminate information, much like we are doing right here, oftentimes, or sometimes around religious and spiritual topics. There are even interactive remote services that some churches, mosques, and temples are able to do. In which parishioners or believers or congregants can, much like we're doing, put into the chat, put in prayer requests. There are both a leveraging of platforms that are already established, like Facebook, but also those institutions and organizations that have the resources are bolstering up their websites. They're thinking about, okay, if we're going to record the service, where does the camera need to be? Okay, what are the images that we want to pair with, as we're doing maybe the communion song, what are we going to have that again is maybe something that we would not be able to utilize if we were in person, but again, thinking about that holistic experience. What are the things that are going to make people feel like they are interacting in some similar fashion, recognizing that these things may not be able to replace the communal experience. But again, digital technology being leveraged in a way that hopefully helps us as we traverse finding safe ways to interact again. Finally, or not finally, but next, online social communities. Again, whether that be private Facebook groups, sometimes it could be as general as following a hashtag, something like wellness or Buddhist meditation. Sometimes that's kind of a loose online social community. And then there, of course, are regulated communities that have memberships that again, for the safety of the community and those who identify there, are closed communities. But there are, again, these spaces where both synchronously and asynchronously people can leave comments, people can watch videos, they can watch videos together. They can have some type of interaction, again, around these topics, and hopefully continue to deepen and enliven the connections that they've made. So maybe it's they're all members of the same congregation, but now they're interacting in a way that they might not have had they not been compelled to engage these platforms in a digital way. Also, something that I've found very interesting is this idea of virtual tours and virtual visits. Since the advent of Google Earth and Google technology really mapping a lot of just places and spaces that we find on our Earth, there has now been this great creativity in some of our sacred sites and thinking about how people can visit. Again, travel has been limited, tourism is down. So again, how can I experience Stonehenge? How can I think about the Sistine Chapel if I can't go there? Some organizations, again, based upon resources and technology, you'll notice that some of these tours are more so photo galleries, but also there have been different developments in technology, virtual technology. There are all kinds of devices now where, you could just as easily, do roller coasters as you can, download and explore the Vatican museums in this interactive way. These places, again, because they are trying to, continue to stay relevant in the circumstances, they're the same audio tours. It's like, how can we present some version of an experience where, while it may not be the same as going there, can I watch, the sunrise over Stonehenge in an asynchronous video while I'm here in Los Angeles and use that to start my meditation? So again, some places have been more creative than others, but I think that, again, the greater utilization of these things and the more in which people are thinking about these topics, the more hopefully they will continue to be enhanced. And hopefully, again, while we look forward to, again, connecting in person again one day, that there are also benefits to thinking about how we can offer these as educational tools, how we can foster community even when we're not together, even when we can meet in person, or even just how we can really think about how we can literally build digital communities that mirror and enhance the lived communities of our congregations and our organizations. And finally, at least for this particular slide, this hybrid experience. We definitely have seen some creativity in regards to both religious practices. I think my favorite was there were a few Catholic priests that were putting holy water in spray guns. And as there was an Easter procession, there was kind of a general spraying. I appreciated that they, again, were trying to abide by safety rules, but really thinking, okay, we still want to have the physical experience of receiving holy water. But again, we want to keep ourselves safe. So what are some innovations or some adaptations that still keep the spirit of what it is? I mean, the holy water was blessed before it was put into it, and they kept a distance, and the Monsignor and the priest were there in respectful ways, and it was done with reverency. But again, thinking through this in-person virtual, what are ways in which maybe people can pick up things? What happened at USC, we did the Interfaith Scholars Retreat. Originally, it was going to be at Catalina. Unfortunately, we were prohibited from gathering. And so we kind of found a happy medium of doing a retreat, a remote retreat, but we sent everybody a retreat in a box. In the box, all of our retreatants, it was a stone, it was a piece of fabric. They were somewhat quote unquote generic artifacts, but students were encouraged to take these artifacts and build an altar or build a kind of a sacred space that they could go to and utilize when they in combination with the occasional asynchronous videos that they would watch related to the retreat, or when we would meet once a day for 4 days for certain keynotes. So again, really thinking through both virtual and in person. What did they need in person that we could mail to them or that we could get to them? And what could we not do that we could maybe find a virtual alternative? So in that particular instance, again, for a retreat, it was something that was finite. It was only 4 days. But thinking through even the process of thinking through that experience has really even helped our Office and Religious of Spiritual Life to think through how we're supporting our students, again, at a distance. USC is all remote, again, this semester. So our programming, again, some of our programming just is on Zoom, but also we are thinking through, okay, what do students need to feel that connection, that one-on-oneness? How can we have them both online, but also encourage them to get offline? And how can we really partner these experiences so that they enhance each other? And that they're not seen as, as something that's lessened or something that, in some regards, there's, being able to commune with people that you care about is important to do it in person. But I think that these experiences have also encouraged us to think about what aspects of our experiences are most important to us. So this was just a resource that we provided for our students. This is relevant to Los Angeles, but we were able to find that there were a number of religious sites that are doing some type of live stream services. You might be able to find some in your local area. Also, and it could be as simple as connecting with a community that you already have membership in and finding out what are their digital experiences, or maybe they're already in a website. Maybe they're already doing these Zoom events. Like I said, some organizations are really kind of thinking holistically about the experience. Some, because of resources, are just, in so much as possible, putting a camera somewhere so that they can have Friday prayers. So regardless of the depth of the use of the digital technology, many groups, regardless of religious affiliation or spiritual affiliation, are finding ways. And it's encouraging to know that, again, because of these circumstances, maybe now I would not ordinarily have been able to attend maybe a Baptist service on the East Coast, or, I think I have family in Baltimore. Maybe now, because of this instance, I can now attend those services in a way that I couldn't before. So I really encourage you all to think through what might possibly be in your area, but also let this also be expansive. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to check out something like our, the Islamic Center of Southern California. It's one of the largest Muslim organizations and mosque, and it is really a hub for Muslim life in Southern California. If that is something that is interesting to you, regardless of where you might find yourself geographically, there might be ways in which you can attend prayer services or get more involved in an educational and spiritually exploratory way. So faith at a distance. I attempted in the title to have the words at a distance. I was trying to be a little funny. I don't. So, but what I wanted to stress with this particular slide was that we've seen in some of the media a lot of pushback, or not a lot of pushback, but there have been some pushback from religious communities that have really felt restricted by not being able to gather in person, and have used terms such as persecution, or they feel marginalized because of certain local laws that prohibit them from gathering together. And without getting into the weed of what is persecution and what is marginalization, because that's really a discussion about power and privilege, I would like to focus more on the advocacy that there are actually a lot of religious and or theological foundations for practicing our faiths at home. If you look throughout religious history, sometimes it was done as a sign of status, whether it was having maybe a small chapel on your property, or it was just because of the foundations of that faith. In a number, whether it be Hindu or a number of Asian faiths and faith systems and religions, they actually have home altars that are foundational to their practices already. So the idea of having a family altar or a family space or a family sacred space in the home is not novel. And so I think that maybe some of our traditions that don't have those things, or at least to our knowledge don't appear to have those things, we can also educate ourselves in our own traditions to think about what is both religiously and theologically okay, but also how we could take inspiration from the past. One of my favorite anecdotes was the idea of the Catholic confessional, the screen. Although later on, and there are theological underpinnings to the idea of secrecy or a certain amount of reverency and being covered by God as you're making your confessions, the actual confession wall was developed around during the Black Plague. And it was at that time, again, a barrier to both protect the priest and the parishioner. So again, it is later on now been interpreted, and it does have these rich theological and religious and spiritual implications. But there have been innovations throughout our histories, many of our religious histories, that at the time were innovations, and we have now connected it or made meaning from something that that might have been necessary at that time, but that now we have some theological underpinnings. I certainly hope that as we continue to talk about all of our faiths, we continue to have these conversations and think about that, both with our religious leaders, our spiritual practitioners, but also ourselves, really thinking about our current interpretations. For many, the experience of one's faith is very personal, even if you find yourself within a larger religious community. So what is community to you? What is communing together? There's a Christian principle that talks about, where two or three are gathered, there I will be in the midst. Does it count if we are gathered in a digital capacity? I mean, I think that even thinking expansively about some of the things that we take for granted, and really examining our hearts to see, like, what about this, at what point is it no longer what it is? Is there some wiggle room? Can I both expansively think about my faith in a practical way, because I still want to practice it while we're currently in these times, but also, is this an opportunity to really think about what is essential? Everybody's talking about essential workers. This has really compelled people to think about what is essential, and I would encourage you to think about to expand that, or to also examine one's faith in that particular context. The other reason why this is something that I hope, this kind of engagement of digital technology is something that I hope that continues in some capacity, even after we are able to gather together, is because of accessibility and accommodation. Something that has come up that fewer people were as aware of was this idea of accessibility and accommodation in a very profound way. Now that services are being recorded, there is now the option of closed captioning. And for organizations that maybe could not hire a sign interpreter, the idea of having closed caption is you are now offering access to a whole swath of people, both deaf and hard of hearing, or even just those who can utilize from seeing the words, different engagement with it. And again, that's something that, it would not have been possible in person, but now we're thinking, okay, accessibility is important as well. I mean, sometimes the reason why people can't go to Sunday services or Friday services or Saturday services, regardless of one's faith background, is many are working, some have childcare issues. There are ways in which now, because we have recorded sessions, or we have these communities in which you can log on and, put in a prayer request at, midnight when you're feeding your baby, or you could listen to the devotional on your walk outside. Again, you are thinking about accommodating and offering access in a way that possibly you would not have had prior. And particularly if you are of the belief that you want to share one's faith, or that your practices are enriching to you and that you think others might be able to benefit, really thinking about accessibility and accommodation and how people are able to find out more either about your faith or about your community is something that I hope that we continue to think about, and that we continue to pull forward from this. And then finally, sacred space at home. As I kind of alluded to when we talked about retreat in a box, and we sent all of our students a few items. For some students, it merely enhanced, or it merely added to spaces that they already had. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of my own. So this, I'm in my bedroom, but this is just a little space that I keep. It's something that has a number of quotes. It has both candles. It has both little trinkets that friends have given me from different faith systems or different travels that I myself have taken. And the reason why I really appreciate having something like that there are doors that I also have to it that I can close it off. But the reason why I appreciate that is, again, sometimes in the mornings, as you're beginning your day. Some might call it an altar. I know that in some conversations around Dia de los Muertos, there are ideas of ofrendas, or these spaces in which you intentionally put candles, you put pictures, you put quotes. It is something that you come to, and that is the sacred space that you entering, whether it's opening that cabinet or kneeling in that space or putting your yoga mat down, that is what creates the sacred space. I have a very good friend named Tasneem who identifies as Muslim, and she had this beautiful interpretation of even talking about, and this is prevalent in a lot of faiths, but she was specifically talking about how we are the temple, or she was talking about when as she came to prayer, when the cleansing of the hands and her face and her feet, it was because of the sanctity that she brought to the process. That yes, there, you can have big elaborate mats, or you can have big elaborate mosque, but for her, just merely her presence and her intentionality and the ritual brought the sacredness to that space. So I just appreciate this, the ways in which I've kind of shaped it in my life. Definitely something that I think I've gone to more, and that I've seen as more salient because we can't meet in the same ways. But I really love the intentionality of having a place in my home that is set apart, whether it be to remember family members and people that I've lost, whether it's to offer intentions, whether it's to just take a moment and gaze at a candle. I really have tried to make that space my own. And even, the trinkets that my friends give me, or that my family members give me, again, that enhances it. It's a great collection of both, Catholic rosaries and Jewish quotes and Christian Bible verses and just general inspirational quotes, and so even as we this time is very much, we don't know where things are headed. We want to keep a positivity and believe that things are changing and shifting and evolving in a positive direction. But I think that regardless on the time frame, using and thinking about creating sacred space or certain aspects of our faith that we can keep close to us, that aren't contingent upon location or artifacts, might really help us as we continue moving forward. So as a final kind of concluding slide, I want to encourage you all to kind of think about what is essential in our faith, and also what does community look like to you? What are the markers that you feel most are needed or most passionate about within the context of your life and your faith? I think that, because of safety concerns, we have really had to pare down. We've had to limit, and we've had to pull back. But if I think we keep a focus on what is essential, if at the heart of it, it is really about our own journeys and our own identities and the ways in which we connect to people, if we keep that as our guiding principle, it'll help us be that much more innovative when it comes to either digital technology or just our own creative ways of making space in our lives and our homes. And so this is a bit of a riff. Remix and Reimagine is actually a part of the title of the edited book that myself and Dr. J.T. Snipes did. But part of the reason why we looked at these two terms is, although this book focuses on higher education and innovations in higher education around these topics, this idea of remixing and adapting rituals while still creating and sustaining community, it's something that I think is applicable to a number of different audiences. When you think of a remix, it takes, I mean, let's not debate current music, but a remix is, as I once knew it, you take a bit of the original and you add your own flavor to it. It still is recognizable and nodding to what came before, but it has a different flavor. It takes you in a different direction. And I really think that the inclination to remix what our current practices, not only does it enliven things, not only does it kind of offer new fresh takes on it, but I think that it's necessary as we continue to adapt and evolve and meet our current or whatever that next circumstance might be for us as a society. And then finally, reimagined. I love this term, and JT was very passionate about this term as well, because I think that in order to see any future, or in order to achieve any future or sustain ourselves into the future, we really have to imagine ourselves there first. And we can reimagine new ways of engagement, new personal practices that still fit within our context, or the things that we find most salient, but that really can be reimagined in a new way that hopefully brings meaning in a new way. So these are just some things that I hope that you all continue to think about, and I certainly look forward to connecting. Oh, this was just my contact information. Oh. Well, I will put it in the chat so that you all can have my contact information. But more than anything else, I just want to thank you for your time and for any questions that you might have, and for just this space to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Sable. Yeah, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask Sable, definitely make sure to type them into the Q&A feature, or if you'd like to send them in the chat, that's fine as well. But thank you so much. This was really informative and really interesting to hear about. I think that kind of start off something that you talked about was kind of the way that technology has made spiritual life a little bit maybe more accessible in certain ways, or has made us notice how much accessibility is something to consider. And I think you kind of talked about this through your talk, but based on either tools like live streaming, for example, or even just kind of knowledge about sacred spaces, embodiment, and things like that related to faith, do you see any ways that will continue to be a part of faith and practices post the pandemic life, and we're able to come together and things like that? Do you see ways that will continue to mesh together?
I certainly hope so. I really do. I think that I don't want to, it's not as simple as an age thing, but I do think that sometimes in conversations about more traditional religions, or when you think of traditional kind of hierarchical structures within certain belief systems or communities, there is kind of this idea that like the old ways are more traditional, and that it's really the new young people that are trying to kind of push these other ideas. And while I don't want to create that false dichotomy, I do think that there is something to be said about these two perspectives coming together. I think of the example at here in Los Angeles, there's a church called Oasis Church. And they are very, even before the pandemic, they were very technologically and entertainment based. Being in LA, they had lights, they had Bible verses, they were tweeting, they had videos and meetup groups and things of that nature. So in some regards, there are some communities that are already kind of thinking very already adapting, thinking where can we meet individuals? And then there are some that are now being compelled to do it. But I think the biggest thing that I really hope is that there's greater conversation between these two perspectives, because I think that there are, I think if there is any hesitancy, it's because, if I do it online, it's not real or it doesn't count. But so I think that really it is also important for these older individuals, or the older perspectives, or the more traditional perspectives on faith, to engage this and say, okay, again, we want to make sure that there's still, context, and that it's not just willy-nilly. But I think that really, having a person of respect within your faith community saying, preaching is just as important or just as relevant if I'm on a video as if I'm in person, or, thinking through, like I said, the example of the priest, he wanted to find a way to engage his community. So water guns, and it kind of made some news, because in some ways it kind of seemed like, how funny that this older priest is using a water gun. But I loved it because it was finding a way, both something that was theologically sound, and that, he clearly felt comfortable enough that he could exercise, but that kept everybody safe. So I do hope that it continues, but I do think that it'll have to be a conversation of both thinking about what we can do and then also making sure that we don't lose the heart, or, you know, that we also, again, I don't also want to say that it always is about getting kind of other people to co-sign on it, or that, you know, some structures don't have the same authority figures, which is also fine. But I think that for those, if there is hesitancy, having someone of religious or spiritual authority say that, you know, God's fine if you send in your prayer request in the chat, as opposed to, like, you know, bowing your head. All of a sudden, let me put my prayer request in the chat because, you know, he said it was okay, you know, so.
Yeah, for sure. I know you talked a little bit about your book and what kind of the remixing and all that kind of stuff. But I'm be super interested to know a little bit more about what you know, the book is about, and kind of the either findings or examples that you talk about related to higher education, because I think that's such an interesting
I was very definitely big shout out to Dr. JT Snipes. He was the one who definitely helped you know, get this idea going. But basically it's an edited volume, and we're very proud of it because it's called, the kind of the subline is Innovations in Religion and Spirituality in Interfaith and Higher Ed. Kind of a long title. But the idea was that we really wanted to showcase scholars, new scholars that were doing innovative work, or that were looking at things that were new intersections. You brought up intersections at the beginning of this presentation. So whether it's looking at both like the queer community and intersections of different faith communities, we have a great a few great articles from our authors really looking at the experiences of Indian American students, whether it be from Christian origins or, you know, their student group experiences. We have some a really great article that looks at this. It's this great interaction between two women talking about conversion, a Muslim woman and a Christian woman. And it's this idea and this interplay of, like, how do these new ways and these new interactions, how can we benefit from learning more about them? So I think that, again, while they focus on students, the idea that there are all of these new well, I wouldn't call them new, but the fact that there's getting new attention on them, and that we are recognizing that the experience of, you know, even religious communities that are accepting of the queer community and the intersection of their religious identity has deep and profound ways as it relates to identity. And especially when you think of higher education as being this time of identity and searching and exploring. I really am happy that we were able to highlight so many new authors that are really kind of pushing forward new stories that are sometimes underappreciated, but I feel are happening on our campuses, are happening in our communities, and we benefit to hear about them and, you know, think about our own selves and how we interact with those stories.
And kind of with what you were saying, thinking about kind of the general idea of this series and talking about intersections of technology in different ways like that, how have you seen, or maybe just generally speaking, like technology and faith intersecting themselves? Have you seen, especially within times of the pandemic where social justice has been a big thing that's been talking about through different fields?
Oh yeah.
Have you seen a greater connection between those themselves, between faith and that, because of technology or through technology?
Definitely. I think that something that I thought was very interesting, this idea of, like, of course, hashtags are used in all kinds of social media platforms, and it's used to kind of coalesce, you know, certain topics and resources around each other. But what I think is also awesome, and I'm sure you've noticed on social media, is when people put multiple hashtags, because, you know, no one post is speaking necessarily to one particular issue. And I think that especially because the internet and social media is this real space to assert you know, kind of people's perspectives on it. You definitely see this idea that, like, my faith calls me to this, and let me tell you why and how it calls me to this. Or something that is actually happening in the coming weeks, myself and Tahil Sharma and Vanessa Gomez Break at USC, we're going to be actually hosting an event looking at colorism in our traditions. So sometimes it's even about speaking truth to power. And once there was a way in which the only ways you could, you know, get to a particular authority figure potentially was to schedule a meeting or to schedule a sit-in or something. Now I'm going on the internet and I am adding you and I am telling you about yourself, and it is going viral. And in a way, there is truth talking to power in a way that just was not seen before hashtags or the saliency of social media. So while I would definitely say that it's happening in a number of different topics, especially, they're tagging the Pope's Twitter account when they're saying, these things, or they're tagging, these authors, or, they're putting these hashtags. So I think that if nothing else, it is this greater expression and this greater space for people to explicitly say, either I'm going to call out my traditions to hold them accountable, or, like six students united for Black Lives Matter, seeing all of these different groupings and the ways in which people have come together. I really hope that continues. And I hope that anybody who has had a religious identity or anything that has ever been important to them, they know how that is pervasive in other parts of their life. And so I think to acknowledge the complexity of that should be first and foremost. And the listening to another's perspectives and where their lives interact and where their identities intersect, I feel is valuable from a human perspective, but is definitely valuable as we seek to learn and know more about each other and work together. Because, we got to keep working together. That's the only way we're going to both get out of this and be able to innovate even further.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely see the ways that technology can bring people of different faiths and that push for like interfaith dialogue and conversation definitely a lot further. So that's amazing.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're kind of finishing things up. Yeah, and just quickly mention that you were part of the WISE Interfaith Dialogues in the past as well. Hearing from you was really, really amazing there. So thank you for coming back and supporting us in this way as well.
Definitely. It's a great community. Definitely I'll put it, can you put my my contact information in the chat?
Yes.
I don't know if this goes to everybody, but if it doesn't, then feel free to pass it along. But I'm just over at USC. Also, if you look at the hashtag digital faith, you could see a few articles that I've done, or just, it's like another hashtag. So you might also get some other things, but definitely you'll find my work related to that as well. But I really wish the best for this series. It certainly sounds like you guys are going to continue to engage these topics very deeply. And I certainly hope to, engage this community more.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here and kicking us off. I think this was a great way to start the series and really kind of talk about so much of what we want to get out of the series and those intersections that are so important to talk about. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who was here and listened and engaged with this conversation. Definitely stop by next Friday as well for our next event of the series. So we're going to be talking about disrupting disinformation with the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center. So it'll also be a really great conversation. But thank you, Sable, and thank you to everyone.